Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship, and this week we're talking about kick drum EQ.
Hey, what do you say? Yes, it's that time again. It's Tech Tuesday.
So last week we started talking about EQ for vocals. This week I figured we'd go ahead and start talking about EQ for the kick drum. So let's go ahead and take a look at the tools that we're going to use, and then we'll start implementing them. So today we're using the basic channel EQ from Logic Pro. But these concepts are going to apply to pretty much any EQ, especially if it's digital. The only real difference is going to be that this EQ has more bands than a lot of digital boards do. So I will try to keep myself limited to what I'm using and let you hear the different bands, and then you can pick what you want to use when you're going to do it on your own board. It'll also work for most analog boards, but there will be a few things that are going to be different depending on which board you have, and I'll try and make note of that as we go. So, taking a look from left to right here, some of our tools that we'll be using today, we will likely be using a high-pass filter or low cut. As you can see, this is a sweepable high-pass. If you are on an analog board, a lot of times it's going to be set to either 80 or 100, which would not be something you would really want to use on a kick drum, because that's going to be where a lot of the meat of your drum is going to be at. So if you have an analog board, you're not going to use a low cut. In fact, you want to make sure your low cut is off. If you're using a digital board and you can sweep this around, then we're going to find the sweet spot where it kind of cleans up the subs without taking away all the low end that we do want. So we've got that. We've got a low shelf that we can use to add or subtract from the main meat of the kick drum. We are going to likely use a low mid to either boost or cut, likely cut wherever there's going to be some kind of muddy frequency, some boxiness in the kick drum that we don't want to have. We may or may not use a mid in the very middle here. Again, that could be your low mid or high mid, depending on what board you have and what you need for the kick drum. But there's going to be kind of a bit of sounds like a racquetball hitting the ground or someone punching a balloon. There's a lot of times a tone like that in the kick drum that we're going to look at and see if we need to get rid of some of that. If we want to add or subtract some of the batter sound, the click sound that comes from the kick drum, we'll use a high mid for that. And then this is a preference thing, but if we want to add or subtract air from the kick drum, so it sounds like the sound around the kick drum, the very top end, then we can use that with a high shelf will be used to add or subtract that. And then finally, I'm not going to probably use this today, but just so you're aware, a lot of engineers like to use a high cut or low pass filter if you want to get rid of all that air and you want to get rid of all the top end from the kick. Now, today we're going to listen to an example where there's just a single microphone on the kick. If you have two microphones and you're going to have one that really focuses on the boom sound, that's where you're going to use that to get rid of all that high end, because you would essentially be getting that high end from the other microphone. But for today, we're going to just go basic using one microphone and just show you what we can do with all these other tools. So today we're listening to a live recording that happened this weekend from a local church. We've got a really good drummer, a good kit, and kind of an okay kick mic, but it actually sounds really good in the mix. But we're going to just kind of hype it up a bit so it pops out of the mix. Now, one thing you're going to hear that I'm doing today, I'm not going to actually solo the kick drum. And the reason why is because you got to think of your drums as a full unit. Everything works together. So you can solo things to kind of fine-tune stuff, but you really want to make sure that you listen to the kick drum and all the other instruments together when you're making some of your final EQ choices, because the kick drum's picking up in the tom mics, the overheads, the snare mic. So if you make the kick drum mic by itself sound great, that's cool, but you might have to adjust it for the whole mix. So we're going to just listen to it all together and just kind of make some EQ changes on that. There is no other plugins on the kick right now as far as like compression or gating. We're just going to be using EQ today. So let's take a listen to what we've got, and then we'll start going through some of those settings we talked about. So it sounds really good right away, actually, but we're going to just kind of hype it up a bit and make sure it pops out in the mix, clean up some things that are kind of muddying up the drum sound. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my low shelf. I just want to get a little bit more sub going on with this kick. And it's not always the case. Like sometimes I use this in a negative fashion, but I tend to use my shelves as if I'm going to boost anything, it's usually going to be with a shelf just to kind of sweeten the sound. So in this case, let's go ahead and boost it up and take a listen to what we get there. Here's extreme. Here's what we're getting rid of. So I've got that boosted up at 7.5 dB at 75 hertz and below. Now, as a shelf, you can see a shelf kind of goes and flat lines all the way across. So we're boosting everything beneath 75 and a little bit in front of it too. So sometimes with a shelf, that's what I want to get the whole thing kind of hyped up a bit. But now there's some frequencies in there that I don't really want where it's getting a little bit muddy. So first, let's take our high pass filter, our low cut. I'm going to crank it up really high so you hear that it's working, and then we're going to back it down until we get the amount of low end that I want to have. So you can hear the kick's basically gone now. Let's turn that on and off and hear the difference. Probably back it down a little bit more. So I've got that set at 57 hertz with a fairly gentle slope. Whenever you look at these things, don't let the visual of it scare you. Listen with your ears and make sure it works the way you want. And you will see that these two EQs are kind of working with and against each other in a very musical sense. So I like that. I like when the EQs kind of create an interesting texture with that. Next thing we want to do is find some of the boxiness that usually comes with a kick drum, especially if you're mic-ed on the inside, which gives you a more isolated tone, but sometimes if there's not a lot of padding in there, you might get some real boominess in there. So we're going to do Seek and Destroy. I'm going to turn up my low mid, kind of hover around, find where it sounds the worst, and then I'm going to cut some of that out. And that's kind of what I'm looking for right there, that kind of wind tunnel sound. We're going to tighten our Q a bit and cut some of that down. Here's with that back in. That's back in. And cut out. It's subtle, but it cleans up that bottom end, that low mid quite a bit. Next, I want to add a little bit of air and see if we can't get it to kind of just pop out in the mix a little bit more. So again, I'm going to use my high shelf for that. Here how it just has a more top end click to it, and it just kind of fits in there a bit more. Now you are going to get a little bit more cymbals too, so you need to go easy with that. Here's with it taken out. And then kind of on those same lines, I'm going to try and find the batter sound of the kick drum. That's usually going to be somewhere between 2 and 5K, depending on your kick. So again, we'll do kind of a Seek and Destroy kind of thing, and then we're going to find it, and then we'll see if we want to add or subtract, depending on what we want to do. So there it is, around 4K. Now, One thing with this, if you boost it, you want to make sure you have a fairly wide cue, and you don't want to boost it a lot, or else you're going to get this kind of wind tunnel thing that we have right now where you can kind of hear it every time it happens. So let's drop this down and spread it out a little bit. I like that. So that's without and with. Let's maybe meet in the middle a little bit. But that just helps the kick drum just to kind of cut through the mix a little bit more. And again, this is totally up to your preference, and you really need to hear the drummer when he's going really hard at it, because you want to make sure that this doesn't start to sound like a metal band if you're in a normal modern worship setting. So just a little bit of that will help to give you a little bit more clarity and just help to cut it through the mix some. So already we're in a good spot. I'm going to just A-B for you what we have versus the flattened out kick, and we can hear the difference. So here's what we had to start with. It's not bad, but here's what we just came up with. It's a little bit tighter and more focused sounding. So my goal for today was to try and just use 4 bands of EQ and a high pass filter. So again, what we have here is just that. We've got a high pass filter or low cut to get rid of all the subbiness that we don't necessarily want. And that's going with and against a low shelf that is being used just to boost up the entire bottom end of the kick drum. On top of that, we've got a low mid cut, getting rid of some of the boominess, and that's set around 190. We're boosting a little bit of the attack of the batter at 4K. It's 4250 to be precise, with just a slight boost and a wide cue. And then finally, we've got a high shelf starting at 7.5K, and that's boosted quite a bit at 8 dB. Again, when you're listening to this in your full mix, helps you to know if you like that or not. The one other thing that I would do if I had another band would be to find, I talked about it earlier, that I call it the racquetball sound. It kind of sounds like somebody's punching a balloon. Depending on what microphone you have and what kick drum you have and how much padding you have, you may or may not want to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate it for you and let you hear what I'm talking about. And then we can cut a little bit of it out and hear how that sounds. It's going to be somewhere around 1K. There it is. Someone's dribbling a tennis ball. On this drum, it's not too bad, but let's just cut a little bit of it out. Here's it back in and out. On this drum, it's really subtle, but I like that. I'm not a big fan of 1K in pretty much anything, but that just goes to show what we're going for. And that's it. Again, real quick, we got the low cut combined with a low shelf to boost up the low end, but cut away what we don't want. We are dipping out some of the low mids around 190, dipping out some of the tennis ball sound around 1K, boosting a tiny bit of batter sound at just over 4K, and then we're boosting the air at 7.5K. Hope this has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at TechTuesday@ascensionworship.com. We've got some really great questions the past few weeks, so please keep them coming and let us know what we can do to help you out more. Until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.